Hey everyone, this is the Mind Workshop podcast. I'm your host, Victor Dwyer, and today we have Pilar on with us as well. And we're going to go through just everything about like healing and really unlocking the pieces of our mind. And she's an author and she's just written a really amazing book. And we're going to dive into just all pieces of the mind. Pilar, please give us a little intro about your book and what you're currently working on.
Thank you so much, Victor. It's really lovely to be here with you, first of all. I'm just so honored to be entering into your community and your space and your mind space as well as your human space. The book that I wrote is called The Healthy Deviant. This is the book. And it's a rule breaker's guide to being a healthy person in an unhealthy world. And I guess the thing I'll start by saying in summarizing the book is that most of us have become convinced that we individually have health problems, that we have mental health problems, we have anxiety, we have depression, and we have physical problems. We have metabolic syndrome or diabetes or joint pain or migraines. And my book is really about the fact that we are collectively suffering at enormously epidemic rates that are accelerating, and that this is no longer a me problem or a you problem, it's an us problem. And I really believe that the root cause of most of our misery is the society we're living in, and it is a set of skills that can be acquired to learn how to be healthy, even in the midst of all of that nuttiness. But it is a skill set. It's like survival skills. You don't necessarily come into the world knowing them, but learning them is in your best interests. And so I'm enthusiastic about talking with you today because your interest of how to be a healthier, happier person, how to be a more productive, successful person intersects exactly with my interest areas of helping people learn how to master this art, which is too little known in the world we're living in right now.
Unfortunately, that's true. So many of us are in that default reality of the default mode of I gotta have more, I gotta be more successful. And to be fair, it's like how our brain is programmed. Like we're really programmed to always be in that negative mind state. And like we came from the humans that were the most anxious, most greedy, and most ambitious people. And that's just how that was the people we came from, our ancestors. And now here we are being humans. We weren't designed to be happy. So I love to hear from you. What are some tools that you have to really like get away from that default mindset and really to becoming a happier person?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that you mentioned just now or referred to a little bit is an area of interest that's embedded in my book, evolutionary biology, which is like how are we wired up by virtue of our kind of caveman ancestral existence to be functioning now? And the fact that there's a mismatch between the way that we were developed evolutionarily, genetically, metabolically, neurologically, psychologically, to succeed and thrive in one set of circumstances that are no longer the set of circumstances in which we live. I do believe, though, that what I call the nonconformist competencies of healthy deviance, basically the body of skills that you need to survive in our current era, a lot of those are about acknowledging that mismatch and learning how to navigate it successfully, not just throwing up your hands and saying, well, I came into the world with the DNA of a caveman and now here I am in 2023 and everything is different. Oh, well, I guess I'm doomed. That's not my approach. My approach is like, how can we get into agreement with the wiring that we have that is hardwired into us genetically? And how do we build a bridge to being successful in the current society we live in? So the nonconformist competencies, thank you for asking about these skills. The first one is amplified awareness. So capital A, amplified awareness. And by that, I mean a skill set that allows you to be more aware than the average person, more of the time than the average person is, about what is going on inside you and around you that may be triggering you or influencing you to do things that are not in your best interest. And alternatively, what are the things that you do that you find to be good, pleasurable, productive, rewarding, helping to make you feel more vital, more focused, more compassionate with yourself and other people. So what are the patterns that are working for and against you? Amplified awareness is a developable skill. I'm not talking about just base level mindfulness here, because I think that's a different vocabulary, one of like, I will be calm and I will eat consciously. Those are good things. Those are aspects of amplified awareness. But for me, that becoming aware level includes things like, how am I feeling right now? And what was happening in the past couple hours that caused me to feel this way more? What did I eat? When did I rest or not rest? When was the last time I hydrated, or was around people that made me feel good about myself? Or how long have I been connected to this device that is now making me feel a little crazy? Those are just a few examples of amplified awareness. But because we live in a culture that massively overstimulates us and over distracts us, our awareness is a endangered resource, really. I mean, it's a dwindling resource in most of our lives. So the lack of awareness is a problem. Reclaiming that awareness is a survival skill. And I teach a bunch of methodologies, including Renegade rituals that we're going to talk about, I'm sure, in a moment. But that's just one of the nonconformist competencies. Interestingly, that leads to the second one, though. And this is something you and I talked a little bit about when we met in Puerto Rico. The second nonconformist competency is preemptive repair. Again, this is what I consider to be a healthy deviant skill set, because almost nobody practices this. If you choose to practice preemptive repair, you will become an outlier in your social circle. You will be doing things much better than most people do them, but that alone can be uncomfortable. So preemptive repair is the art of getting ahead of the damage that's done to us just by virtue of living in the culture. You referred to it. Thank you very much for the unhealthy default reality, what I call our society. Because you live in an unhealthy default reality, you're constantly being broken down. You're being inflamed and irritated and distracted and overwhelmed. That set of circumstances leaves you incredibly vulnerable to making unhealthy choices and to being influenced by unhealthy forces that really can throw you and roll you in ways that break you down. So preemptive repair is the art of getting ahead of that damage, and it includes things like resting before you're tired, eating before you're ravenously hungry, hydrating before you're dehydrated, unplugging before you're in total reaction and no longer have any control over your own thought patterns and feelings. And then that finally leads to the third nonconformist competency, which is once you're aware of the issues and you're practicing preemptive repair, you have a surplus now of capacity you didn't have before. And I really strongly encourage people to expend and invest that surplus, at least in part, in what I call continuous growth and learning, which is continuing to master and develop new skills as you grow, as you change, as you evolve, and as you age. Because frankly, some of the stuff that worked for you in your 20s may or may not work for you in your 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond. And our culture is changing so fast. Yeah. AI just being one of the most recent examples. We have no idea what the future is going to look like. So 5 years from now, you may need a different skill set. That's just a little bit of a tour through some of the nonconformist competencies of healthy deviance.
That's amazing. That's super insightful. What else? What else would you say to someone that's really starting to get started in this whole like journey of becoming more self-aware of our thoughts and really being able to separate yourself from that? What would be your guidance to get them started in that? I know you went through the first steps, but how would you get them initiated to say, hey, these thoughts aren't yours and that they're just thoughts and you can separate yourself from that? What would you say to that person?
Well, interestingly, I don't know that I love the idea of trying to quote unquote separate ourselves from our thoughts. I think there's a strategy, obviously, in Buddhism and others to kind of realize, I am not the thoughts of this moment. But my life experiences, I am a product of those experiences, and the thoughts and feelings that I'm having come out of those experiences. So I think a kind of mechanistic separation of us and our thoughts is not always helpful. I mean, it can be a useful tool in a moment, but bigger picture, I refer to a set of experiences I refer to as the Healthy Deviant hero's journey in my book. And I will mention that a lot of what I did in my book was actually illustrate these kinds of concepts because, frankly, you can talk a lot and this stuff goes in one ear and out the other. But I think being able to picture it. So like, for example, I just made this little illustration in my book. And I'll talk through really briefly these different phases of the Healthy Deviant hero's journey. Basically, it begins here and goes this way. So if you can imagine the first phase, I call the natural state. And this is how we come into the world in our baby form. Kind of ideally, most babies come in pretty healthy and happy, and they just kind of doing their own thing and feeling good in their own skin. They don't have a lot of self-consciousness. If they're
Yeah.
interested in something, they put it in their mouth and they decide for themselves, tastes good, not taste good. And we are charmed by children in part because of that kind of guileless openness and comfort in their own skin. We all want that. What happens, the next phase, though, is called compliance. And for me, this is about what happens to us as we become aware of the fact that we're meant to do what other people do. We're trying, one of the survival skills that has always been true of humans is fitting in and being part of a tribe or a larger group is a really important part of our survival. None of us can survive very long. Even back in the olden days of our ancestral reality, we hung out in groups of people because it was a good survival strategy. So a certain amount of compliance and agreement on living how we live together is important. But there's a part about our unhealthy default reality, our modern and post-industrial society, that has us complying with things that are not in our best interest. They're not in the interest of our small group, our family, our community. They're in the best interest of a post-industrial capitalist society. And most of those interests are designed to get us to feel not good enough about ourselves, to want and buy things endlessly, and to constantly believe that by impressing people who are not us, we'll be more successful and happier and healthier. It actually works against us in most cases. That kind of compliance takes us into the next phase of the Healthy Deviant Hero's journey, which I call descent. And this is where we start to experience some of the painful thoughts and feelings that often lead to what we now call mental illness or disorders: anxiety, depression, a feeling of inadequacy, a sense of reactivity to things. Like we have to almost defend ourselves against the forces that we feel converging on us. Most of us have a hard time doing that because we don't yet have the skills. And so we end up in the bottom place of the journey I call darkness. This is where we often will see addictions kind of get to their cracking point, where people have interventions or get institutionalized, or depressions that are so severe people don't feel that they can get out of it by themselves. A sense of hopelessness, a sense of existential dread. The world is a terrible place. It's not worth it. Suicidal ideation, things like that. But from that place, the next step is divergence. And my goal is to get people to move, again, not to separate themselves from their thoughts, but to recognize the thoughts I'm having are a product of me living in a society that has not been designed in my best interest. It is not designed in a way that is letting most people thrive or flourish. And I'll share some of the statistics with you in a moment to kind of confirm that from a scientific statistical reality. But one figure alone is that 97.3% of US adults are not finding it possible for them to regularly manage basic healthy behaviors, like eating a reasonable healthy diet, managing regular exercise, not smoking, maintaining healthy body composition. Victor, 97.3% of people can't pull that off right now.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can separate yourself from your thoughts all you want, but until you recognize a lot of the thoughts you're having are false thoughts that have been embedded in you by virtue of living in this culture, I think we start to take missteps and try to solve the problems through positivity, for example, or like just affirmations. And I think that that's kind of a superficial level approach to solving a much deeper problem, which is like, I can see that the unhealthy default reality has gotten its claws into me. Now my job is to extract those claws and find a path where I can reclaim my vitality, reclaim my confidence, reclaim my enthusiasm in living, and ultimately reclaim my own autonomy. Now, separating yourself from your thoughts is a form of autonomy. And in the short run, again, it can be useful to go, I'm thinking crazy thoughts. I don't want to be thinking these thoughts.
Yeah.
But let's go back to amplified awareness. When did those thoughts begin? When was the last time you found yourself without the burden of those thoughts? That's what interests me. How can we get people back to that space of their natural state? So after divergence, where you begin experimenting with a different way of approaching all this stuff, you enter a phase called rebellion, which is basically about like, what the hell? Why are we living the way we're living? This is crazy. And then you enter a phase I call healthy deviance, which is a much more sustainable, pleasurable way of living in our culture. That, interestingly, though, brings you right back to your natural state, that state we all want to re-inhabit, of being good in our own skin, feeling interested and alive and lit up and wanting to know more and being curious and like, my life is available to me fully now.
Yeah.
And so that is the place I think real mental health lives, is back in the return to that natural state. Knowing everything you learned from the journey, though, it's not a waste. That journey is part of what makes us who we are. And again, I don't want to separate myself from that part of myself. I want to have compassion for it and investigate and interrogate and envelop it in a kind of loving presence.
Yeah, I love that. And like, because when we grow up, especially like as either like even a male scenario, like where like when we're on the playground and the teacher says not to cry, big boys don't cry, then we like learn
Yes.
that like, hey, like it's shameful to cry, and then that happens in adulthood when I
Yes.
cry, then we go through the exact same thing. It's like, wow, it's like a shameful
Yeah.
act to cry and feel sadness, and it's important to like justify your emotions and say, hey, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to feel pain, it's okay to feel these
Yes.
things, and a lot of it comes down to the childhood stuff that happens like when we're
Yeah.
there. So if you're able to trace back to those moments, it's really powerful.
Yes. I think I'm so glad that you raised that point about, boys not crying is a perfect example of compliance. And girls, same thing. We're supposed to be nice. We're supposed to be pleasant. We're supposed to be pretty. We're not supposed to make things inconvenient for other people. We're not supposed to make up too much space. So there's a kind of the mask of masculinity, the toxicity that comes along with being a boy in our culture. And there's an equivalent set of things for girls, just like there are for young people and for older people, just like there are for, rich people, poor people. We've gone through a series of divisions and separations and identity-based bifurcations. We learn about by osmosis from just living in our culture. It doesn't have to be taught to us directly, but sometimes it really is. You're not supposed to be that way. You're the wrong size, the wrong shape, you're behaving in the wrong way. And we're punished subtly or overtly for behaving in the ways that our unhealthy default reality,
Yeah.
doesn't approve of. And that, I think, is another really overlooked part of one of the challenges of being healthy in an unhealthy world, is that deviation. Again, Healthy Deviant is the name of my book, but that deviation from a norm comes at a social cost of being weird or being not approved of, not being certain you're going to be re-included in the group you want to be in if you disagree with any part of this.
Yeah.
So there is a rebellious experimental kind of quality to like, I'm going to do what works better for me, even though you might not agree with it. And the thing I'm really excited about is what happens when enough people get together and begin deciding there's a better way to live. They're going to learn from each other and support each other in taking those steps. I also want to acknowledge a comment that was, I think, a very lovely one about one of your listeners who says that they're just learning English and they're understanding about 50%. And asking for a summary in simpler words. I think the simplest way to explain this is that we are all a product of the societies in which we live. Whatever culture you're from, you learn the social expectations and norms of your culture at this time in history, in this geographic location, with your religion or your cultural specific things, your gender, and so on. The way that you are taught to behave and the things you are taught to value may not be the things that are in your best interest to live out from here on forward. And I believe that learning the skills of being a healthy and happy person in our society today, whatever your society is, we are the first generation in the history of humanity to be trying to live lives anything like the ones we are currently living. The level of technological, environmental, and social change has been so fast that there is no kind of catching up with it that we can do. We're having to learn this on the fly. And I think I'm one of the first authors to have written a book about how to do this successfully on the basis of my own personal and professional experience for this moment in time. So each of us is going to learn our own way, but I'm passionate about sharing what I've learned, both the hard way, personally, and I guess in a way that has been rewarding for me, which is professionally. My background is as a health journalist, and I did that for about 25 years. So I have a pretty deep well of information. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had a really good point about talking about that kind of person we're running away from, the things that we have to comply with. And like I think a lot of us, we are running toward that perfect version of ourselves, the one with the nice body, the amazing with all the money and everything else like that. But
Yeah.
at the same time, we're running away from the thing that we're not supposed to be. Like, because we're told we're not supposed to be fat, we're not supposed to be ugly, we're not supposed to do all these things, and we're always running away from that bad version, that shameful version of ourselves. And it was until I realized that I need to accept that person. Everything that I shame in one person, I need to construct that in my brain and say it's okay and accept them for who they are, because I would judge these people. And then I realized that I'm running away from being fat. I'm running away from being those things. And I have to accept that and saying, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be fat. It's okay to do those things. And from there, I realized I'm no longer running away from those insecurities anymore. It's something that I've accepted. And so that way I'm not running away from them anymore. I've accepted them as inside of myself, where I no longer judge anymore. So that was a big realization for me on my side.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Yeah, and I think too, for me, I remember when I started a magazine called Experience Life Magazine back in 2001. It's published by Lifetime Fitness.
Cool.
I'm not normally on the cover. This just happens to be one where I am. But when I started the magazine, I had pretty, I would say, progressive, on the one hand, ahead of their time ideas about whole person health and fitness, about, what one might do to be more successful in eating healthy and moving in healthy ways and observing healthy life patterns. But I don't think I fully understood this piece that I'm now teaching, which is how much the judgments we have about how we and other people should be are based on some combination of advertising, kind of unrealistic body ideals that have been embedded in us through watching television and reading magazines, and now with social media and all of the stuff that comes through these devices. But how most of the maladies, like overweight is a really good example, that we experience and blame ourselves and others for, are really the outcome of societal circumstances that only have existed in the past 100 years or so. I'm 56 years old. Until I was a teenager, obesity was a very rare thing to be observed. I mean, you just did not see very many very fat people walking around. And that's a reason. There's a reason for that. Not that people have lost willpower or become more slovenly or care less about their health and fitness than they once did. Our food supply changed. Our lifestyles changed and it became more sedentary pastimes, more sedentary professions, less time spent moving between places. Everything can happen right here and now. So the food supply just alone, they now believe to be, massively to blame for what we think of as an obesity problem. But I don't know very many people who have learned the skills of navigating a processed food environment and mastered the art of locating, sourcing great, healthy, whole foods, stocking them successfully, cooking and preparing them in ways that are both healthy and pleasurable enough to create satiety, what means satisfaction, and to do that in the context of a busy life where we're not just like one person is at home cooking. No one is at home cooking. Everyone is out working and doing 1,000 different things. So this skill set is a missing skill set. And when we observe people who are suffering from chronic illness and overweight, mental and physical illnesses, the tendency is to blame the victim. I think the tendency is to think if you were a more disciplined person, then you would look more like the people in the advertisements. And that dynamic has set us up for so much misery. Meanwhile, by the way, a lot of the advice that we've been given about how to stay healthy and fit is completely counterproductive.
Yeah.
Eat less, exercise more being the most obvious example. We now know, because science has proven this, that this calorie restricted approach to eating, which is just like calorie in, calorie out thinking, is absolutely false. And it works against people, lowering their metabolic rate, creating all kinds of crazy cravings and having them feel more and more out of control of their food. So the way we were eating when my grandmother was around was just simply less likely to produce the result that we are now experiencing and observing around us. People haven't really changed. Our society has changed, and our behaviors have changed as a result of those societal influences. So I think the thing that we see ourselves running from is the symptom of a culture gone crazy. And we observe it in other people, sometimes with judgment and disdain, for exactly the reason that you talked about, Victor, which is like we're rejecting and fearful of it ourselves, because we understand the pain that is going to come from being that thing that we don't want to be is so great that to avoid the judgment of ourselves and other people, we're willing to starve ourselves, restrict ourselves, overcomplicate our lives and our heads in ways that end up making us miserable in other ways, creating disordered eating, creating anxiety and depression and a sense of hopelessness, addiction to other stuff. and social media being the most recent example, but there's certainly many other addictions that one can embrace to basically anesthetize ourselves
Yeah.
against the pain of being alive right now.
And it's really amazing all the things that we do in the name of progress. Like we starve ourselves. I don't even know. Like I can't even think of anything. Like we
Well,
starve ourselves.
biohacking.
Yeah, like we do everything just to in the name of progress, and
Mm,
we think it's a positive thing. It's like, oh, I'm progressing. I'm getting better. I'm making my body more presentable. I'm making it better, and in reality, we're just running away from our insecurities. We're running away from all these
mm,
things, and it's just not a good way to live. And if we're constantly running away from something, and honestly, like both our goals and the things we run away from were both created by society. If you think about it, our goals
of
are
course.
to have that perfect body, to have all the wealth, and to have that nice car, and to have everything perfect. And that's our
Yeah.
goal that it was constructed by society. And then we're running away from that person that is ugly, that is fat, and everything else, everything society deems as shameful. And we're running
Yeah.
away from that person. So regardless
Yeah.
of where we are, we're either running towards something in society or running away, or both, which is most of the people. And you have to
Yeah.
really take a step back and ask why. Why
Mhm.
are we chasing more money? Why are we chasing more running away from this? And really just start accepting, like, hey, like there's no point. And just if you ask yourself why, you're able to really figure out and make goals that are true to you rather than to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the why is interesting. If you think about like Maslow's hierarchy or most of the philosophical ideas, that base level, most of us have pretty simple needs. It's like food, shelter, water.
Yeah.
But effectively, we want to, first of all, feel safe and secure. We need a certain level of base safety and security in terms of survival to be able to do much of anything
Yeah.
else. So most of us are spending most of our time trying to cover off on what we see as our basic survival needs. The thing is that in the society that we live in, we've been convinced that more is better,
Yeah.
faster is better. And so that kind of race to achieve and amass wealth, for example, often boomerangs on people. And they think I'm going to be healthier and happier once I have this next $1 million or whatever it is. But in the pursuit of that next $1 million, a lot of people sacrifice their physical health and vitality, their mental health and vitality, and the relationships with other people that are actually the most important ones to creating their happiness in the long run. Relationships with family, friends, loved ones, and so on. One of the things that I'm really interested in is helping people reframe what their happiness really hinges on. I believe that health is the first human freedom that we have. As we lose our health and vitality, we lose our capacity. We lose our ability to make our decisions for ourselves. Options close down. The amount of energy it takes to accomplish anything becomes much greater. And the risks we're taking at either ending our life early or living a life of much less gratification than is available to us as the result of just chasing money, the risks are very, very high.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been interesting for me as a health journalist for 25 years, I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of people's stories come through the magazine, success stories, profiles, and so on. And I have to tell you, one of the most common things that we see and hear are people chasing the idea or the image of success that has been presented to them as desirable, and in the process losing some of the things that were actually the most important to their happiness. I don't think you can't have both. I mean, it's possible, I think, to be wildly wealthy if that's important to you and also happy, but you're probably not going to achieve that aim by virtue of following the prescription that our society has given you, which is basically work harder and faster. Don't listen to your body when it's telling you it needs a break. Feed yourself as whatever the caloric prescription is of the day without worrying too much about the quality of that nutrition or where it comes from in the bigger picture of things. Just push, 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 push. That pushing is toxic. And that is not a system setup that our body minds were, again, back to evolutionary biology, ever designed to endure. One thing I talk about in my book, Victor, that I think is applicable as we mull all of this stuff over is it's an illustration called The Ape in the Arcade. And it's an illustration of basically a gorilla inside of a video arcade with pinball machines and the video version of those. And I'm sort of posing the question of what would it be like if we took a wild animal, with the same genetic makeup that we have, basically great apes, very similar to human beings genetically, pulled that animal out of the jungle, stuck them into the middle of a video arcade, and just kind of expected them to figure it out. Like, what are all the buzzing lights and buzzing and beeping things? What are the lights about? What's the goal of being in this space? Oh, there's a cash machine. Well, how do I lose that? Oh, there's a concession stand with crappy food. That's all that's available easily to me. Oh, I guess I'll eat that. There's a machine that's dispensing pain pills. That would be interesting to discover. But what happens to an animal with that makeup in an environment that different from the one that they were developed genetically to be living in? And it's not hard to imagine that the animal would be suffering, scared, in physically and emotionally kind of disrupted and dysregulated, and probably freaked out and lonely and not sure how to get out or how to survive in that space. I think effectively that is what we have created for ourselves. We have thrust ourselves as organisms into an environment not unlike a video arcade, and we don't know how to get ourselves out. And I think challenging a lot of the assumptions about what success or winning looks like in the context of that arcade is a really important thing. Do we really want to be more successful at the arcade games? Or do we want to be successful in getting ourselves out of the arcade so that we can live lives of some sort of meaning and purpose and satisfaction? Again, not saying that you can't also make some money, like I'm for that. But if you do it at the expense of your mental and physical health, you're not winning the game of life, in my view.
Yeah, 100%. Because there's so many miserable millionaires out there that think that that $1 million will make them happy, but in reality, we both know that that's just not how it works. It's really you really got to fix what's up here, and no amount of money, material objects will ever fix that. It really won't.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And I one thing is interesting. I think, you and I probably both spent time around people who have an almost unlimited amount of money. And my observation has been that is probably the least likely correlated to health and happiness. That factor is the least correlated. Most of the statistics that have been run, the research that's been done on this suggests that in our current culture, I think the last time I read the number, it was about $70,000 a year. That was a cutoff. Below $70,000 a year, if that's your income, your net income, you're suffering from some level of stress or deprivation or incapacity to meet basic needs that will create either stress or deficits in some part of your life that will reduce your happiness and create stress that can affect your health as well. After about $75,000 a year, 75, more money does not correlate to more happiness. It does not correlate to less stress. What does that is some combination of human relationships and the skills that allow you to build and enjoy them, and your physical health and vitality, your mental health, which is the stuff you're talking about, like how in control and how much ownership do you have of your own thoughts and feelings? Because until you can appreciate and enjoy the things that you currently have, no amount of more of that is going to increase your satisfaction, because you're still left with I'm limited in my ability to be happy with what I have. More of it doesn't make you any more capable of appreciating it. So what I've witnessed is ultimately people who are millionaires, billionaires in some cases, living lives that look really kind of fabulous on the outside, but who are not gratified inside and now actually have other problems mostly related to their wealth, how to manage it, who wants it, who's stealing it, where's the right way to spend it, what happens to it when I die.
Yeah.
That all of those things take up an enormous amount of bandwidth, and they don't like who they're becoming as the result of that either. So you can have a lot of fun with money. Money can be freedom, money can be power in some ways, but it won't replace the basic skills that you need to be a healthy, happy person in our world.
That's amazing.
At any level of it.
And is there anything else that's been top of mind lately that you've been wanting to communicate lately?
Oh gosh, so many things. I think the big thing that I want to communicate is that we have made health and fitness improvement so complicated and so confusing that I think a lot of folks have just effectively given up, or they've resigned themselves to regimented lives that feel joyless. And you and I met at a conversation. I was giving a talk in Puerto Rico for a mastermind group around what I call healthy deviant biohacking. And I kind of switched gears, in midway and said, actually, what I'm trying to get you to do is unhack a body that has been hacked by living in the unhealthy default reality, hacked in a bad way. And I think my advocacy for the Renegade rituals that I talk about in my book, which are things like practicing a morning minutes practice that takes 3 minutes, taking intermittent breaks throughout the day to reset and recalibrate your nervous system, to having a wind down period before bed. These simple things, if you do those first, I really believe that all of the other stuff around nutrition and fitness come more naturally and more easily. I think we have got to reverse order of what we're encouraging people to do. Rather than worrying about diet and exercise at this point, I think we need to worry about re-regulating our nervous system, reclaiming our autonomy and our basic mojo, our ability to make healthy decisions for ourselves without endlessly complex prescriptions. So my goal is to have it be a fun, joyful ride, not a misery and self-denial ride. And I now believe that that's possible because I've spent the last, 20 some years giving people counsel on how to do that has worked for them. It's all supported by science. I mean, a lot of it is basic behavior change stuff. A lot of it is kind of basic metabolic science. But I don't think it needs to be as hard as we've made it. And I think it being hard is now part of the problem.
Yeah, that's amazing. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today because I know we can go on for this for actually 7 hours. So, Pilar, please tell the audience how to find you and how to find more about your book.
Yeah. So the book is called The Healthy Deviant. It's available in all your famous, fabulous book places. You can get a free preview of my book at my website, which is healthydeviant.com. And I would also encourage people, both the preview of the book in print and the preview of the Audible audiobook. But there's also a fun free quiz there called Are You a Healthy Deviant? And it's like 20 questions, takes 2 minutes, and it tells you where you fall currently on the Healthy Deviant spectrum, gives you a better idea of what Healthy Deviance is about and where you might want to move in your journey from here. If you decide you want to keep learning the art of healthy deviance, I have a lot of courses and programs that help you do that, and a lot of free tools as well as a Facebook group that I would love to invite people to join. But I really want to just say thank you so much, Victor, for helping me get the message out to folks and being interested yourself in mastering it.
Yeah, like it's anything that helps promote happiness and really fixing all these unhacking unhacking our mind. Anything that will help do that, spread positivity. That's all I care about.
Right on. I love that. Well, thanks for doing your part for making it a healthier, happier world.
Yeah, thank you. That's all we have time for today. Thank you everyone for watching, and thank you so much for joining. Thanks.